welcome back to Country Cow Designs. I'm Jo and this is Adam.
Hiya.
In this video tutorial we're going to show you how to make the Kynsa backpack. This is our latest sewing pattern. This is entirely designed by Adam.
Yeah, so it's called the Kynsa backpack because in Cornish, Kynsa means first. So this is my first complete bag from scratch I've designed. I've helped Jo in the past with...
He's been editing my patterns and putting his touch on them and making changes, but this is your first full one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where it all started was I had an idea for a bag to make for Jo, which is what this is. You may have seen it on my Instagram. I made this for Jo.
We've come a long way since this one. There's a lot of changes.
It's a lot of change, but it kind of inspired the design, didn't it?
Mostly structural changes to give it a little bit more stability. So it's got this easy closure here. Now, we're saying that this is like an ambitious beginner pattern because there's no curves, there's no zips. It's pretty straightforward. It's the size really that's the, like getting it through your machine. It's going to be a little bit harder than making a small bag, isn't it?
And I would say am I an ambitious beginner? That's probably my skill level.
You're a bit further.
Maybe a bit further. So if I can make this, then you can as well.
So it just opens up like that and then it's got magnetic snaps. So inside it is massive. You can fit a ton in there, which is really great. And it's quite comfortable to wear. And yeah, I mean, we're really liking it. So you can adjust this depending on how full the bag is. So that's quite handy.
We've been shopping with these bags and like it's properly ballooned out, hasn't it?
You can fit a lot in.
Yeah, it's great.
And on the back, you've just got a little slip pocket. So there's no complicated pockets. Really, you can customize it as much as you want. So if you want to add an interior zip pocket, we've got a video on how to do that. You can add a few extra pockets, card slots, whatever you fancy to kind of personalize it. Or you can keep it rustic and simple like it is in the pattern.
Yeah, this one here I did on my machine, the Sailrack Fabricator. So this is not industrial friendly. This is heavy materials that I used.
It's not domestic friendly. So Adam used, this is like twill, very, very heavy twill. There's no way my domestic machine could have made it through that.
With the stabilizer, it's...
But my domestic machine can easily make it through cork. And if it was like a faux leather that was thin, I'd be okay. But I wouldn't recommend, well, to be honest, I would never recommend using faux leathers and vinyls on my domestic because my domestic can't handle it. Every machine's different, but just bear that in mind. So for this one in the video, we're going to be using wax canvas and cotton for the top. So we're excited for this one.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy the tutorial. If you have any questions whatsoever, just drop them in the comments. If you make changes to your bag, let us know what you've changed. You can grab the pattern from countrycowdesigns.com. And we just want to say a massive thank you to everybody who supports us with our sewing patterns.
Yeah, definitely.
Every time you purchase a sewing pattern, it helps us so much and it's just really encouraging and really motivates us to keep going with these designs, which we absolutely love. So thank you so much for watching. And we hope you enjoy the tutorial. So I've got my straps and all of my pattern pieces cut out. Now for my backpack straps, I'm going to use 1.5 inch wide webbing. This is just so that I can show you how simple it is to fit if you want to use a different width of webbing. But in the pattern, we use 1 inch for everything. So those are all of my straps. I've got my little strap ends, which are made of cork. Those need to be cork, vinyl or leather because they're going to have raw edges. Got my pocket piece and my 2 main lining pieces, which are interfaced. Then I have my main stabilizers, my base stabilizer, my 2 top exterior cotton pieces, all interfaced as well, my pocket piece, and my 2 top lining pieces, which have this little indentation here to make the lining fit better. And then I've got my 2 main exterior panels. To cut out all your pattern pieces, you'll first need to print the pattern pieces, which we've got a separate video for, so I'll just link that now. I actually got Adam to cut this one out for me because I'm just recovering from a bout of COVID. So I am going to set all of this aside for now, and the first thing that we're going to do is start on the straps. Now, you should have 3 strap ends. And what we're going to do is simply fold them around one of the raw edges on each of the long straps. So to hold that in place, I'm going to use a little bit of fabric glue. Make sure that it is equal on both sides like that, and clip that in place. And repeat that with one of the raw edges on the other long strap as well. Now, an alternative way of doing this is simply to sort of double fold the raw ends, or you could use metal strap ends, but this is my preferred way of doing it. And at the same time, you're going to do the same thing with the top closure piece. So although I'm using 1.5 inch webbing for the backpack straps, I've kept my top and bottom closures at 1 inch wide. Now that all of my strap ends are on, we've just got one on each of these. I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this raw edge with 1/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure that your sides are even so you're catching both sides as you sew it. Set those aside and grab your grab handle. Now you need to mark it on the center, and then you're going to mark it 2 inches to the right and the left of the center. Then just fold your grab handle in half and clip it down the length. So find your marks, and what you're going to do is just sew between the marks. Make sure you backstitch really well at the beginning and end. Use 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then sew again with a 1/16 inch seam allowance, or as close as you can get to that. Now I recommend a matching thread colour for this. Once that's sewn, just unclip the ends. And what you want to do is get it so that this unsewn edge is up. So this is like the rounded edge. And on here, we need to mark it 1.5 inches in from the end. So you're just going to draw a line across here. And I'm using an erasable fabric pen for all of the marks that I'm making. And then just set that aside for later. Now grab your top closure, which has a strap end on one end, and you're just going to wrap that around the center of a middle bar on your slider. Fold it back by 1 or 2 inches, whatever you're comfortable with, and clip that in place. Now we're just going to sew a box here to hold this in place, and if you like, you can sew an X through it as well. Alternatively, you can just add a couple of rivets. I'm sewing right over my strap end because it's made of cork, but obviously if you were using a metal strap end, you wouldn't be able to do that. I'm also using a hump jumper to get really close to the slider. Okay, so now that's done, just grab a swivel hook, put that on the raw end, and then you're going to put this back over the middle bar of the slider. And just like that. So again, we're going to mark it 1.5 inches in from the raw edge. And set that aside for later. So grab your bottom strap closure and you want to mark it 2 inches in from one end. Then we're going to put a D-ring onto this, and what we're going to do is just fold the long edge down to that mark. Now if you prefer, you could use some double-sided tape or glue to hold this in place. And then we're going to fold the other short end up to meet it. Like so. And you can just set that aside for later. For the last of the webbing, you're going to grab your base anchors. Now, if you are having 1.5 inch straps like I am, bear in mind that your base anchors need to be 1.5 inch as well. So the first thing you're going to do is mark it 5 1/8 inch in, and then 1 inch up from there. Now we're going to fold this end to meet itself. So I'm just going to use a little bit of double-sided tape. And you're folding this up to the 5 1/8 inch mark.
Now you want to put a rectangle ring on the other end, and we're going to fold this one back to the 1 inch mark. We're leaving this 1 inch gap because this is where the base seam is going to be, and you don't want to be sewing through all the base seams as well as 2 layers of webbing. This will ensure that it lies flat, because otherwise there'll just be too much bulk in one place. Repeat that with your second base anchor and then set those aside, and we'll move on to step 2. Step 2 is the exterior slip pocket. For this step you're going to need 1 main panel and your 2 slip pocket pieces. First thing you need to do is fold the slip pocket pieces up by 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side. The easiest way to do this is to draw a line 1/2 an inch up and then fold it up to meet that line. So you can see that I've already done mine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both these pocket pieces right sides together, and I'm going to make sure that bottom edge in particular matches up. Now I'm going to sew the other 3 edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I'm not going to sew this bottom edge. Now that's sewn, I'm just going to trim down these corners. This will help it have a neater edge, but make sure you're not trimming your stitching. And then we're going to turn this pocket right side out through that opening in the bottom. Now I've got a turning tool to help me poke my corners out, and you just want to spend a time sort of pushing these seams out, or you can roll them with your fingers, or you can press them with an iron just to get a nice neat finish. So I'm going to press this with an iron, and then I'm going to use a little bit of fabric glue to hold this bottom edge closed. Now I'm just going to top stitch this edge with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So grab your main panel, and you want to mark it as indicated in the pattern. So I've marked my line, and I've marked the center, and then I've marked the center on my pocket piece. And what we're going to do is match up those center marks and also make sure that this is lying flat on the line. Now you could pin this in place, but because I'm using waxed canvas, I'm not sure that I want to. So instead I'm going to fold, I think, this bottom edge up. Now, because I'm working with waxed canvas, I can just kind of fold it and crease it as much as I want, because by the end of this, it's going to be creased like crazy. So that way I can sew down this edge, and then I'll take my clips off and sew the rest, but it should then all stay in place because I've sewn the first part. So as you sew the bottom edge, you're going to be closing up the bottom of the pocket. Okay, so that is your slip pocket finished. Now we'll move on to step 3. Step 3 is the exterior back panel. For this step, you're going to need one of your panel stabilizers, and I've drawn a center line down this just to make it slightly easier to fit. You're going to need your top closure, your grab handle, your magnetic snaps, your 2 backpack straps, the top panel, and the main panel with the slip pocket. Now, if you're following the pattern, what you should do now is attach your panel stabilizer to the back. So I've also drawn a line down the center here so that I can match it up nice and easily. Now, because I'm using a wax canvas, this isn't going to stick. I can't fuse it. I can't use double-sided tape. I could use fabric glue, but it's quite a thin, light coloured wax canvas, and I don't want the glue to show through. So I'm going to show you how to fit this in a later step if you're in the same situation as me and you've got a fabric that you can't fuse to. So for now, we'll skip to the next step and we will fit the top closure. Now you've marked a 1.5 inch line across here. And what we're going to do, we're going to center this. So I've already made my marks for centering it. And you're going to clip it in place. So it's got 1.5 inches hanging off the edge. This is important for your straps because it adds strength to have this overhang. Make sure that your strap slider is upside down, so it's facing downward. And I'm just going to clip that in place. And now I'm just going to baste that with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now grab your 2 backpack straps and you want the raw edges to be hanging over, again by 1.5 inches. So make sure that it's lined up there. It's going to be right up against that center strap. And now I'm going to baste those into place. And now we need to fit the grab handle. So first of all, you want to make sure that the rounded unsewn edge is facing up. That means that once the bag is finished, that will be on the front of the bag. So what you want to do is line up your 1.5 inch marks again and clip them in place. But if, like me, you have used wider backpack straps than the pattern states, you will notice that this is going to be a squeeze. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my overhang. I'm going to change it to about a 1 inch mark and then clip that in place. So just check that it's equal on both sides and then baste that into place. Now we're ready to attach the top section. So if you've got a directional print, just make sure that you've got the bottom edge and you're putting that right sides together with this top edge. And we're just going to clip that together. But around this section, it's going to be hard to clip it. So I'm just going to put a bit of double-sided tape there first. Now we're going to sew that top edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're wondering about any of the materials that I'm using in this video, I'll link them all in the video description to show you where I sourced them. So if you didn't fit your stabilizer earlier, now is definitely the time to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to push everything so that the straps and all of the seams are going down behind the main panel. So because it's probably bulkier, it's going to take a minute to kind of persuade the seam to go that way because it's going to want to go the other way. But what we want is we want all of these seams to be pointing down. Now, this is where I love wax canvas because, as you can see, it's got a nice crispy seam. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to fit the stabilizer. Now, it needs to be right up against the seam. So you're gonna have to push it underneath these seams and underneath the straps. Now it's really important that this is centered because later on the whole of the bag is going to be structured around it. Okay, once you're happy that that is pushed right up into the seam and that it's centered, make sure it's lining up with your center mark, then you can clip it in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this up and use these big clips. Now this is only going to apply if you've got a fabric like wax canvas that you can't fuse to. Normal fabrics, you can just go ahead and fuse it or use double-sided tape or fabric glue or anything like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to top stitch it on the main panel, and I'm going to do an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and then 3/8 of an inch. And as I go through, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sewing through the straps and the stabilizer and all of the seams. So we're going to capture the whole thing, and we're going to do that twice, once with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and then with a 3/8 of an inch. If you have a needle that moves on your machine, you can move it over and then you can easily do a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance using the presser foot as a guide still. Okay, so that's top stitched. Now you might be thinking, oh, my panel's going to be flapping around. It won't be for long because soon it's going to get stitched into the sides and it's definitely going to be nice and secure. So don't worry about that too much. What we can do now is fit some rivets. This is totally optional, but if you want to, you could add some rivets here. If you were going for a more rustic style, you could like add a box and even an X for each of your straps just to kind of really reinforce them and give it a more rustic look. So I'm just going to fit a few rivets here. Also, if you want to, you could add rivets at the top of the pocket to reinforce it. Now is the right time to do that because you've got the base stabilizer, the back stabilizer behind it, which will give it a little bit of extra stability. So that's all my rivets fitted. Now you've probably noticed I've got an imperfection in my webbing just here. Because we sell the webbing ourselves, what we do is we cut out any imperfect sections like this and use them for our family and friends bags. So this is going to be for a family member. So that's why we're kind of happy to use these, because we just hate seeing stuff go to waste. And it's not actually going to affect the use of the bag, but you've probably noticed that imperfection there. So I've fitted all of my rivets. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit the magnetic snaps. So we need to fit female snaps on both sides. So what I've done is I've measured and marked according to the pattern where it needs to go. Then what I'm going to do is place this washer over the top of that mark and mark the side slits. Then I'm going to snip those slits. Now I've also got a piece of Decaville Heavy. Now you could use any stabilizer you've got. You could use foam, fleece, pretty much anything you've got lying around. You just need a scrap. And this is going to give like a little bit of extra strength behind it. So I'm going to place the washer on there and mark the slits again. And then snip through those. So now when I fit my magnetic snap, I can put it through the slits in the fabric. Then I can put it through the stabilizer. And then through the washer. And when you fold your prongs back, make sure that they are lying nice and flat, that it's really tight. So I'm going to repeat the whole thing on this side. That panel is now complete and you can set that aside and move on to the next step. Step 4 is the exterior front panel. For this step, you're going to need your magnetic snaps that are left over, the bottom closure strap, your exterior top piece, your exterior main stabilizer, and the bottom panel, the main panel. So what I've done is I've marked the center down this main panel, and I've also done the same on the stabilizer. And we're going to fit this 3/8 of an inch down from this top edge. Now, again, I can't fuse it to my wax canvas, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that's placed correctly and that my center lines match up. And I'm going to be sure that it's exactly 3/8 of an inch down. So it's really important that it's centered. And then I'm just going to clip it in place because I can't fuse it, but in a moment we're going to sew the bottom strap closure on and that will hold it in place. So flip your main panel over and you need to mark it according to the pattern. So you should mark a location here. You're also going to mark your strap closure just down from the D-ring. So what we need to do is place that on there and then we're going to stitch this in place. So I'm going to try a bit of fabric glue because I think that's going to be the best thing to hold that in place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew across the line that I drew on this connector and I'm going to create a box like this and then I'm going to sew an X through here as well. Now if you prefer, instead of sewing the X, you could just put a few rivets through here, whatever style you prefer. So, as I mentioned earlier, I do recommend using a matching thread, but for this tutorial, I figured having a contrasting thread would make it easier to see. So that will have now secured the stabilizer on the back. Now what we need to do is grab the top piece and place it like that. So you've got the bottom edge, and we're going to match the bottom edge to this top, like so. Place them right sides together and just clip those together. So we're going to sew this top edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and the stabilizer on the back is 3/8 of an inch down. So you're going to be sewing right next to this stabilizer. So what we now need to do is push these away from each other, but what we want is for the seams to go behind the bottom panel. So the seams are going to fold over your stabilizer. And again, you can see how easy it is with wax canvas because it just kind of creases so nicely. There we go. And I'm going to top stitch this panel with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to do a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to make sure that it matches the back panel. Now that's done, I am going to fit the magnetic snaps. So I've already marked them as per the pattern instructions, and I'm going to go ahead and fit those exactly the same as we did before. Fit your second magnetic snap, and that's your exterior front panel done. Now we can move on to the next step. Step 5 is the exterior assembly, and for this you're going to need your 2 base anchors, your base stabilizer, and your 2 completed exterior panels. First thing we're going to do is we're going to place these 2 panels right sides together. Now if you want, you could roll up your straps and clip them together to kind of keep them out of the way, just whatever works for you. And first of all, you want to clip your magnetic snaps together and make sure that they match up. And then we're just going to clip it together so that we can sew this bottom edge. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this bottom edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that is sewn, unclip your magnetic snaps. And we're just going to work on this base. So the first thing you want to do is press this seam open. If you're using cotton, you could just do that with an iron. As I've got wax canvas, I'm going to just use this seam roller, but you could just do it with your fingers. And on the base stabilizer, you want to mark the center, as I've already done here. Now what you want to do is inset it 1/2 inch from each edge. So it should be matching up quite well with these stabilizers, but you should definitely have this gap here. So make it centered, make sure it's 1/2 inch in from these short edges, and ideally what you want to do is just glue that in place or double-sided tape it in place. But again, because of my light white wax canvas, I'm just going to clip it in place. So flip this over, and what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch either side of this seam. That's going to secure the base stabilizer in place and just make sure that the base is lying nice and flat. To do this, you might want to just roll up a bit of your bag because it's going to be awkward to get it through on one side. So depending which side you're doing it from, you might want to roll that side up whilst you're doing it. So I'm just going to sew this with an 1/8 inch seam allowance on each side of the seam. I'd also recommend just shoving your straps into the back pocket. That will kind of keep those out of the way whilst you're doing this. This is a big bag, so just take your time and watch out that the rest of the bag isn't getting caught on the table of your machine as you're sewing it. So the next thing you need to do is grab your base anchors. Now, on the right side, you need to measure from the edge to underneath the rectangle here. Now, depending on your rectangle ring, that measurement will differ because some rectangle rings are thicker than others. So you want to measure that, and then you're going to mark the halfway point. So you can see I've already marked mine. I've already marked on my main panel as well, the measurement in from the edge. So all the measurements for these are in the pattern. Now what I need to do is I need to place these on the mark and make sure that the center line is lined up with that center seam. Now it's going to look like it's off center, and that is correct. It will be off center. It should be hanging over by about 3/8 of an inch on each end up to the rectangle. This means that the rectangle ring will be completely off the base, and that will allow the straps to sit neatly once we've sewn the box corners. So I'm happy that mine is placed correctly, that gap between here and the end is about 3/8 of an inch. I'm really happy with that placement, so I'm going to glue that in place. Now the reason I'm using glue for this part is because it will be hidden. So I can go ahead and use it and it doesn't matter on my wax canvas because the base anchor is going to be on top of it. This gap here will be lying over your seams, and it's the reason that we did that is so that there's not too much bulk there. Now it's really important that your rectangle ring is on the back of the bag because your straps are going to need to come down and connect to this. So make sure that your rectangle ring is on the back. Now I'm happy with those. I'm going to sew that on with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, getting as close as I can to that rectangle ring, and then I'm going to sew an X through. If you want to add bag feet to your backpack, you could do that through these now, but this webbing is going to kind of act as bag feet for the bag. So that is by far the hardest step in making this bag. So if you struggle with that, don't worry, that's the hardest bit. Again, a matching thread would be really helpful. I've used a contrasting thread so that you can see it clearly in the video, but a matching thread will hide any mistakes that you've got going on here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to flip this over, and at the top of each of our top pieces we're going to draw a line. So that's 2 inches down. So I've already drawn mine, and then I'm going to fit some double-sided tape. Now if you don't like using double-sided tape, then you can use some fabric glue later on instead of doing this, but I'm going to put some in now because this will make it easier when we fold this top down later. Now I'm leaving it out about 1 inch on the ends, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now pull your exteriors so that they are right sides together, and if you want to, you can just kind of tuck your straps in again into that pocket. And we need to line up the sides, so you're going to have to kind of squash the base of your bag. And what we're going to do is just clip the sides together. Now, if you start here where the seam is, then you can make sure that the join is perfect, and that's going to look better later on if that matches. And obviously also your magnetic snaps need to be snapped in and matching. Once that's clipped down both sides, we're going to sew both of these sides with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you're using a domestic sewing machine like me that has a table, just be careful as you're doing this that you don't get the stabilizer or any other parts of the bag caught on the table as you're sewing it. So once you've got those sewn, we're going to create the box corners. So to do this, we just want to press open the side seams on the exterior. So you can do this with your fingers, or if you're using cotton, you could use an iron. And then what we're going to do is we're going to match this side seam with this base seam and just clip those together. And then the rest of the box corner should work itself out like that. So you can clip the whole thing into place. And then just add a clip or two further down the corner. This will just make it slightly easier when you're sewing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew through here with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and make sure that you backstitch well. You're sewing very close to those base anchors, so you may find it easier to move your needle over to get the seam allowance correct, or you could change to use a zipper foot. Once you've sewn the first line of stitching, just sew another row behind it within the seam allowance. This will reinforce the seam. So now you need to turn your bag right sides out. Once that's turned out, we need to mark it from the side seams in on each edge. So just use the measurements in the pattern for that. And then we're going to create the side folds. So I'm going to put my straps in the back pocket again to keep them out of the way. Now this is where we're going to be sewing in our main panel stabilizer. So make sure that your stabilizers are sitting flat. And actually I'm going to have my straps out for a minute. What you should be able to do is you should be able to feel the stabilizer here, and you're going to wrap the fabric around the stabilizer. And then we want to fold it up to the mark that you made at the top. So you're just going to clip it all the way down. And at the bottom, it should meet up with this box corner. So once you've done one side, you're just going to do the other side on the back panel, and you want to do the exact same thing. So you can just make sure that your panel stabilizer is sitting flat inside. If you're using entirely cotton for your bag, you could press all of this with an iron, but I'm just going to leave mine like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sew down these sides. We're going to top stitch them with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you need to start at the top and finish at the bottom, and you won't be able to get the whole way down, but you want to make sure that you get as close as you can. It should be less than an inch from the end, so I'm probably going to be able to get down to about where this clip is. So you're sewing from top to bottom on each side. That way, if there's any stretch in the fabrics, it will match. So I'll take that over to the machine and do that now. Again, with this section, you really want to take your time. Don't rush it. Make sure that your bag isn't getting caught on the table of your machine, and you may want to use a hump jumper to get over the seams in the center of the bag. Okay, so that is the back done. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip over the front side, and we're going to do the exact same thing again. So we want to wrap it around the stabilizer. So first of all, just if you've not fused your stabilizer, like I haven't, just make sure it's sitting nice and flat and wrap the fabric around it. When you're sewing these sides, just be careful that you're not getting another part of the bag slipping underneath your needle. So just be aware of where the rest of the bag is and take your time. Okay, so that is your exterior done. Hopefully now you've got a nice bit of structure. You can see kind of how the bag is going to come together. So set that aside and we'll move on to the next step. Step 6 is the lining, and for this step you're going to have your 2 top lining pieces and your 2 main lining pieces. So to start with, you just need to mark 2 inches down across both of your top pieces. So I've already done mine. Then you just want one of your lining pieces, your main panels, and one of your top. Now what we're going to do is we're going to match these edges up. So the top of your lining top is slightly wider. And what you're going to do is just place that right sides together, and then we're going to clip that together and sew it. So I've done that for both of my main panels. Now what we need to do is top stitch the seams. So I'm just going to push the seams down again so that they're behind the main lining panel. And I will press that with an iron. And then I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and top stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now both of those are top stitched. I'm going to place them right sides together, and we're going to clip so that we can sew the sides and the bottom. So the bit that you want to match up first is this seam here, because that's going to make the whole thing look neat. So clip that on both sides before you clip the rest. Now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew the sides and the bottom with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And if, like me, you have lost your 2-inch line, you can just redraw that. The reason you might lose that is when you're pressing this, the heat can erase your fabric pen. Okay, so now that's sewn, we need to create our box corners. So what we're going to do is just press these seams open. Now, you could take this over to the iron and press all of the seams open now, but I'm going to create the box corners first and press the seams later. So you're matching those seams just there, and then you're going to clip that in place. Now you need to sew both of these box corners with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. When you're sewing the lining on this bag, do not increase your seam allowances. For some bags you do need to do that, but this bag has a lining that is designed to fit it. So make sure that you're using the standard 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for the lining. Once your seams are pressed open, you need to fold the top edge down to the 2-inch mark that we made. So I'm going to again press this with an iron. So what we're doing is we're just pulling it down to the 2-inch mark. Make sure that your seams stay open so you get a nice flat edge there. We're going to do that around the whole of the top. And then you can either clip this in place or use fabric glue or double-sided tape, or you can top stitch it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to top stitch it with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, because the final top stitch will be an 1/8. So I'll use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance to hold this in place. So there it is, top stitched. Now you don't have to do that, but for me, when I'm doing a drop-in lining, this is how I get a really nice neat finish, because now this fabric isn't going to move around at all when we're doing the drop-in lining. So that's why I prefer to do it that way. Step 7 is the final construction. So we're going to do the same thing on the exterior that we did to this lining. So first of all, just make sure that your magnetic snaps are undone. Mine are a little bit strong. Okay, and we need to fold this top edge down to the 2-inch mark that we made. So this is why we put this double-sided tape in here earlier, but you could use some fabric glue instead if you prefer, or you could just press it down and clip it in place. So when you get to these top stitch sections, you want to make sure that your stitching is folded in towards the side seam. Once that's all folded down to the 2-inch mark, you can clip that in place, or for me, I'm going to take this over to the machine again and I'm going to top stitch it with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, exactly like I did with the lining. When you're top stitching, you can start in these side seams. That way, when the bag is closed, any back stitching will be completely hidden. So now we're going to drop the lining into the exterior. And you want to make sure that it fits nice and snug on the inside, that it's not too baggy or anything like that. So just push it right down into those corners. Now, if you want to, you can add a bit of fabric glue to the base between the two bases. That will really help it sit flat on the bottom, but that's completely optional. Now, mine's looking like it's a really good fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up the side seams on the lining to the side seams on the exterior and clip that. And you want to do that on both sides. And then you need to clip the rest of the top together. So I like to sort of pull it taut and then just clip the center. and then I work my way out. Now another step you can do if you really want to make sure this stays perfectly in place is you can glue between the layers. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take it straight over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew it with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire top edge. Okay, so another reason that we use cotton for the top of this bag, or we recommend that in the pattern, is because you want this to be nice and flexible. And if this was a thicker material like cork or vinyl, you would kind of get a lot of bulk building up here, especially when you're trying to close the bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shape my bag. There we go. So you can bring those sides together. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Bring the stitched folds together. And I'm going to take this over to the iron and press these folds. So you can see at the moment they're kind of looking a little bit messy. So I'm going to press this all with an iron to get like a nice crisp finish and help shape that top edge. So that's lying much flatter. So you need to pay particular attention to this fold and this fold, and you need to make sure that your lining is folding in correctly with your exterior. So just make sure that your lining's in there nice and neat, and that will give you a much neater finish. So the last thing to do is to attach the straps. So to attach the straps, you're going to need your strap sliders. And the first thing you're going to do is put that through the slider. Then you need to bring the strap from the bottom of the bag toward the bag like that. And you're going to come back up and over that middle bar. So you want to have a small overlap, 1 to 2 inches. Now you can sew this on your machine if you want to, but it's going to be a little bit awkward. So I am going to fit rivets instead. So you can fit a couple of rivets just here. Before you do that, just check that you have attached your strap correctly and that it slides. And be careful that you're only punching rivets through these 2 pieces here, that you've not got your strap caught in there, or else you're going to end up with holes in your strap. So we'll do the same thing with this other one. We're going up and over the middle bar of the slider. Then we're coming from the bottom of the bag up towards the rest. Make room around your middle bar and feed the strap up and over. And again, just check that your strap is sliding, and then you know that you've got everything on there correct. So I'm going to go ahead and fit the rivets.
So there you have it. That's your finished backpack. So I've got to admit, I actually prefer it with the 1-inch straps. This is a little bit more chunky than I was going for, but I wanted to be able to show that you can kind of change things up in this pattern and it's not going to cause a problem for you. So I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. I will say I'm sorry for any building work that you could hear in the background, but they decided to start building a new road and a new school and a new town behind our house. So there's going to be some building work going on for a while. And I've been trying to time it so that
I'm not doing it whilst they're out there, but every now and then you'll hear a bit in the background. So I think that one turned out really well. I mean, you can't really go wrong with a bit of rifle paper co, can you? And I hope that you've enjoyed making this one. Our next pattern is a little crossbody bag that we are making in association with Amy of Bedhog Shop. So hopefully you've heard of her. If not, just check her out on Instagram. She makes the most amazing bags. And she came up with this design and we're turning it into a pattern. So this is going to be our next one. Yeah, we made it to match. It's kind of cute, isn't it? And for this one, we're going to do our first ever maker's box, which is where you buy like everything that you need to make the bag, including all the fabric and everything, all in one box. So if you're interested in that, you can visit our website, countrycowdesigns.com, and sign up to be notified when we're doing that. If you've got any questions about this video, feel free to drop them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you soon for the next tutorial. Bye.